Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Will. I am the projects coordinator here on the 10X program, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for these lightning talks. The way that this is going to work is we have 8 teams who are going to be presenting about some of the work that we're doing. They're going to speak for just a couple of minutes, and I hope that you all will find these projects interesting and valuable as we do. So I know that the teams are really who you all are here to hear from. But at first, I'm going to give a real quick overview of 10X for those of you who might not be familiar with our program. So here's a little bit about 10X. And basically, what you need to know is that 10X is an investment program designed to take valuable ideas from federal employees and turn them into real projects. Now, this is simple, but we put a lot of thought into this. And I want to highlight 2 key components from what you're seeing on the screen. The first is this idea of 10X as an investment program. Now, in my time in the government, one thing that I hear a lot is the way that the government talks about technology is in terms of spending and purchasing. I'm an agency, I have a business process that I think technology can improve, so I'm going to spend some money to purchase a piece of technology. What we don't hear a lot about is investing, and this is a really key principle for 10X. We do not view ourselves as a team who spends taxpayer money. We view ourselves as having been entrusted by the public with a small amount of funding. And to do right by the public, we invest the funding that we receive from them back into the government so that the government can serve the public better. The second component here is that all of these ideas come from federal employees, which I imagine is most of the folks on this call today. And the reason that all of our ideas come from federal employees is quite simple. We believe that civil servants have valuable ideas on how the government can improve the way it uses technology. Let me talk a little bit about the 10X approach. So how do we turn ideas into real projects? Well, as I mentioned, our ideas come from federal employees. So the first thing we do is we solicit ideas for how the government can use technology better. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Civil servants are the folks who are on the front lines of public service. So when the government's asking itself, well, how can we use technology to serve the public better? We think that it makes sense to ask the folks on the front lines that very question. A couple times each year, 10X evaluates these ideas that we receive, and we choose a couple to move through our 10X process. And here's what that process looks like. Our process is a phased funding approach designed to weed out untenable ideas quickly and move promising ideas forward. Now, this approach is based on private sector venture capital practices. And I want you to think about this. How is a venture capital firm going to choose how it invests its funding? They're probably not going to write a check for a really large dollar amount and invest it into an idea that hasn't been proven yet. They're going to give a small amount of funding to a project, and when that project starts showing promise or proving value, then they're going to increase the funding that they provide to that team. This is what 10X does as well, and we view this as a key way of mitigating the risk to the success of our projects and mitigating risk into the taxpayers' funding that we receive. So we only invest small funding in the beginning, and as an idea proves itself, and only if an idea proves itself, do we invest further funding into it. Our approach has 4 phases: investigation, discovery, development, and scale. And at each phase in our process, the dollar figures increase and the resources that we contribute increase as well. And a project is not guaranteed ever to receive funding past any phase. It must prove value every step of the way. And that's really it. It's quite simple. If you all would like to know more, feel free to reach out to us. In addition, we can go to 10x.gsa.gov to learn more. And now I am going to hand the microphone off to our project teams, who are going to talk for just a couple of minutes about some of the work that they're doing. And if there's time left at the end, we'll do some Q&A. So first up, we have Kate McCall-Kiley and Dustin Hogenson, who are going to discuss the project Improving Access to Government Housing Assistance. Over to you, Kate and Dustin.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having us. So my name is Kate with XD. We're an emerging technologies applied research lab inside the US Census Bureau that has the distinct pleasure of working with 10X and HUD on this very cool, highly collaborative project to help those in need find housing. So I'm actually just going to hand it over to Dustin for the majority of the good stuff, but intro that this project is closing in on the end of phase 2 and has a pretty cool proof of concept prototype that represents an example, basically how 10x can incubate in agencies and launch something in a matter of months as opposed to years. So it's been really exciting for us to be a part of it, and I'll hand it over to Dustin.
Cool, thanks, Dan. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so big thanks to Kate McCall-Kiley and Luke Keller from 10x, as well as Chalita Brantley from HUD. A little background before we get into the actual proof of concept and kind of how that manifested. Back in 2015, HUD had built a tool called the HUD Resource Locator, which was designed to allow end users like a family looking for public housing or a social worker helping a client who's experiencing homelessness find assistance, a shelter, or resources to help them, find affordable housing or to find a place that they can live. We were at the time responding to a need to make these data more available and centrally organized, as well as make that data geospatial in nature. And historically, these data were available on HUD.gov, but they were in table format, and they were 7 layers deep in 7 different sections of HUD.gov. So it was very difficult to find these data all in one single place. And at the time, we were also constrained in terms of the resources and time, and the tool was a reflection of designs of that time. 4 months ago feels like 10 years ago. 5 years ago was like a millennia, basically, in terms of the design of some of these tools. So we were never able to organize around user-centered design, nor were we able to account for the voice of the customer as much as the project should. So if you go to the next slide, 10x was able to help us not just with their technical prowess, but also with their organizational capacity around user-centered design and capacity to coordinate and discuss design choices with actual end user customers, including HUD employees, and then interpret them back into industry best standards. And so through that whole process, several months where we were interviewing HUD staff that regularly interact with customers of all kinds who come into our field offices, we were able to account for all kinds of best practices and some design changes and recommendations based on their feedback, so that, for example, we would be able to, customers looking for affordable housing in Seattle, in the first version, you type in Seattle, and it doesn't show you the boundaries of the city at all. And so we've taken that into account, that when you, in the new proof of concept, when you type in Seattle, it shows you the boundaries of the city in the context of where the customer is within that city. So we were able to present that proof of concept to programmatic executive leadership, and they have been given lots of great feedback. They've been very engaged in that process. And we very much hope to get this proof of concept in front of the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary in the near future to move this proof of concept into production and made available to millions of Americans. Next slide, please. Yeah, so through this whole process, we were able to wrap our heads around what it would take for waitlist data, and it is a very complex process, but we were able to establish that it is possible, and the importance of just having a space and time to build a true proof of concept from 10x has allowed us to take on some of these components, which we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. So thank you guys very much, and I'll pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Kate and Dustin. Next up, we have Mike Stern, who's going to be discussing government notification services. Over to you, Mike.
Hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about government notification services. My name is Mike Stern. I represent the 10x team that is working on government notification services. We can go to the first slide. There you go. So ultimately, the problem that we're trying to solve or encourage is better communication between government entities, business units, and the people that they serve by using more modern communication techniques like SMS and or email. And really, that's not a new practice, but we are exploring the space of a pent-up demand of folks who want to do it or have great use cases in order to better serve the public, but are, there's a barrier that's keeping them from doing so. And we believe that the government notification services has the ability to reduce that tooling adoption barriers such as security compliance, which we all know getting an application in ATO can be a challenge. So any amount of work that can be done to smooth that process with messaging specifically in our targets, kind of following the cloud.gov model, where really there's a premium or a value put on a service that lowers the ATO process. In addition to that, there's procurement hurdles, dealing with vendors, different vendors who have different pricing models, having high availability by having multiple vendors serving messages. All of that takes time and energy. There's continual contract renegotiation, potential pricing and model changes. All of those are potential hurdles that may stand in the way. And then finally, operations and maintenance. Email and SMS is not a hands-off operation. A lot of times, depending on how you're doing it, there's challenges as far as getting spam filters and that kind of thing all set up and coordinated, as well as messaging number consistency and that type of thing. As well as ultimately, thin staffs may not have the ability to support it 24/7. And that maintenance burden may not be able to be borne by the smaller teams. So what are we building and with who? Ultimately, there's a little bit less building than a typical 10X program that's going around a technology solve like this. The UK Notify platform exists already, and that is a couple of years old. And in fact, the idea has been so widely accepted by the UK government and the services that a couple of different governments have also adopted that, and in various forms have either forked or adapted the code base. So the Canadian government, the Australian government have both used the same code base as a seed for their own notification platform. So there's a little bit less building and potentially more about integration and standing up the service. And ultimately, the slice of functionality that this service provides is an API or bulk upload UI that allows folks to send notifications to the public or even internally to other members of the government. Along with that is a templated message service that's optionally used that can adapt to the type of message you're sending. So if you're sending an SMS, it's obviously going to be a little shorter to the point than a typical email would be. That templated engine allows for parameterization and different messages to be inserted. A big question that we're talking about here in our phase 2 is really who are we building this with? And what we're in the process of doing is finding folks. The idea itself has been validated by a couple of different governments and government services. And what we're looking for within the federal space is partners to go along with us as we potentially move to a phase 3 and operationalization eventually. So we're both looking for kind of a champion, for someone who would love to kind of help us with advocating for it, helping us with funding model and that type of thing, as well as agencies who are looking for a solution or help in transitioning from just sending emails to SMSs, or even people who have done this successfully or not in the past and would like to talk about their experience with us. So, any volunteers as far as that goes is something that you can follow up with us afterwards. And then finally, this is the best part about 10X is you learn something on every project. And I love this, the fact that it's been included in these slides. So what have you learned and what has it changed? So As we approach this, we realize that no matter how good an idea is, ultimately there's a bunch of questions as far as funding and operation as it goes. So, you know, whether it be cost recoverable, appropriated funds, all of those are different challenges for a commodity service like the GNS. So as we look to the future, we're looking at different options, and you know, it's not necessarily going to just be a simple path as far as great idea, let's do it. Really, we want to make sure we're covering all the different questions that are out there. So feel free to reach out to us. The contact information is in the slide deck. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mike. Next up, we have a project that is combating bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning implementations. And I'm going to pass it over to Shaudi Hosseini.
Great, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So our motivation for this project is the observed vulnerability of machine learning systems to various types of bias. So why should we care about bias in government? Because it has an enormous human cost. So one example of the human cost of machine learning bias is the fact that a machine learning-based recidivism risk tool used widely in a US court system until just a few years ago was found to assign disproportionately harsh risk scores to Black offenders, regardless of their actual criminal history, resulting in thousands of unwarranted prison sentences. Now, while machine learning holds tremendous value for any number of data-rich civic efforts, we have to be cautious in implementing machine learning applications in government settings because these systems can introduce and greatly amplify systematic biases, including those that might disadvantage specific vulnerable populations, like those sharing demographic characters such as age and race, in decisions and predictions. So more worrisome still is the fact that potential failure points span the entire machine learning pipeline, from data collection to cleaning to training to model development. In other words, even if your data is pristine, your algorithm can still introduce bias into your model output. Next slide, please. So to get ahead of these issues before the major AI/ML investments planned all across the government in fiscal year 2021 and beyond, we prototyped a suite of resources and tools to help both educate general and technical audiences about bias, and to motivate the auditing of models and data for potential bias, and further to guide data preparation and model development practices that can help identify and mitigate sources of bias along the machine learning pipeline. So in our most recent phase of work, we built an annotated library of gold standard data sets and curated state-of-the-art papers most relevant to the machine learning tasks we found to be common across tasks and agencies. We also built a collection of Jupyter notebooks customized for government-specific development environments, methods, and models that contain executable and modifiable code for a variety of relevant bias identification and mitigation techniques that come into play in both training, data, and developing models themselves. In the next phase of work, we plan to expand the user-friendly library of resources that I just talked about, expand the range of notebooks that we built to be more comprehensive, work to develop tools that automate some aspects of the above task and require minimal coding, and to build an interactive recommendation engine that walks users through decisions that need to be made along the machine learning pipeline to help guide them towards bias-reducing decisions. We're planning to do some of this work in collaboration with the AICOE at GSA-TTS and various partner agencies. Next slide, please. So what have we learned over the course of this project? A lot. And it's fundamentally to change the way we've approached some of the things that we're building. Our major insights include the fact that not all stakeholders, even if they're technical, know about machine learning bias or know why it's important. So one of the ways we've solved for this was to incorporate a strong educational component into some of the things we built, and to hold a workshop series that we started in the last phase and is ongoing to educate people about the importance of machine learning bias, to introduce some of our tools, and to open the floor for feedback from various government stakeholders. The next major insight was that technical users are overwhelmed by the massive amount of resources on machine learning, and most recently ML and AI bias and ethics online. And a lot of that is of variable quality. So one of the things we've done is to really focus on, in the resource library that we built out, focusing on things that directly address proven use cases in the government, to ultimately reduce the burden of choice on government developers who either don't have a background in this or really fix workflows that can be disrupted by introducing too many options to them. The next major insight is that bias is not always, unfortunately, fully solvable. It's an inevitability, especially when you're dealing with natural or human-generated data sets. So something that we've done and endeavor to do in the next phases of this work is develop risk and bias metrics that are actually meaningful for the specific government context that we're working in, and to keep experts in the loop with the hope of having them give feedback onto what levels of bias are acceptable for a given application or use case. The next major insight is the field is rapidly evolving, and even domain experts sometimes don't know what the latest developments are. So we have to really work to ensure that our whatever tools that we do end up building and that we have built to date are up to date. So to ensure this, we will continue to engage regularly with external research partners whom we've leveraged to great effect in the past. And the final insight is that federal use cases and development environments are pretty idiosyncratic. They differ in many key ways from those encountered in industry and academia. So to address that insight, we've worked to build features that accommodate the unique constraints and needs of government, particularly the fact that we do a lot of our ML work by acquisition, and we need to be auditing things that we haven't necessarily built ourselves for bias. And next slide, please. So thank you so much. If any of this resonates with you, we're always looking for research partners, internal pilot partners. We want to learn about use cases across government. So please reach out to us. You can email us the email displayed on the screen, or visit our website at xd.gov. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shaudi. And next up, we have Alicia Rouault, who's going to discuss de-risking government technology.
Great, thanks. Well, hi everyone, my name is Alicia. I am product lead at 18F. And the project I'm going to tell you about today is about de-risking government technology. So what does that mean? The problem that we're addressing here is that government technology projects fail at a truly alarmingly high rate. We know from the Standish Group's report on this that only 13% of large government IT projects succeed. And so this work is really about exploring ways that federally funded technology projects can succeed. And if you look behind me, we did that by going to many different state capitol buildings. And this is a picture of Michigan's back in February. So you can see the snow behind me. But I'll go into a little bit of how we began to answer this question. So we're in phase 3, but initially we focused our work on developing a field guide. This is a document that really explores how state and local governments can de-risk technology projects inside government. It describes sort of fundamentals around agile and human-centered design, but also basic principles of modern software design so that the folks designing, scoping, and implementing software projects in government who may not always have a technical background can really begin to have, excuse me, a consistent and sort of informed vocabulary and conception of how agile projects ought to work. So this is a field guide really targeted for state governments. And then most recently, we've been building out one for federal agencies as well. This is all like extremely actionable guidance that was built out by the experts on the 18F team who are embedded in government agencies. The next part of the work was really taking what we had prototyped through this field guide and beginning to turn it into a curriculum and a training series for state governments. So over the last 6 months, we've piloted a curriculum. This talks through agile and human-centered design fundamentals. So again, giving folks a common vocabulary and understanding across government, whether that's a procurement person, a budgeting staffer, a legislative aide, or an agency program staff person trying to navigate this world. So really giving them that common vocabulary. We've also began to sort of host roundtables on agile oversight and budgeting. So while you may be pursuing an agile project, a lot of governments have not yet begun that hard work of updating oversight and budgeting processes to match agile project management. And last, we held a series on product ownership and procurement. And so really working with public sector employees to navigate these topics, but from the perspective of working in government. And so we piloted these with the state of Michigan, the state of Texas, and the state of Colorado. So we're taking everything that we learned and publishing these two field guides, the state and the federal version, in a website. And we're going to be launching this sometime in mid-July, so stay tuned for that. But I think one thing that's already happened, which is really exciting, is after sort of going across the country and having these really in-depth conversations with different state governments, we've begun to see these ideas and these principles begin to be embedded in proposed law and oversight. And so we saw that the state of Michigan literally wrote in some of this guidance into some proposed budget law, as well as the state of Texas writing it into their budget board oversight guidance. We've also seen this actually be forked and translated into Czech. And so we know that this content is meaningful, it's valuable to an American audience, but it also has international value. And so it's really exciting to see this content kind of spread naturally. Finally, what we've learned and how it's changed our approach. I think one thing we've learned overall is that actionable advice over principles is really necessary here. So we are continuously improving these field guides with real world examples. So if you have an example of how you're applying Agile or human-centered design in your specific context and you'd like to share that, we'd love to hear that story. We also learned that, unfortunately, the way that Agile and human-centered design training is currently framed broadly in the mainstream, it's not designed for work in the public sector. And so we've tried to do our best to translate those practices for a public sector audience and the unique constraints that we're operating within. And last, there is a continued need for sort of hands-on training. And so we're looking to expand this workshop to a federal audience this year. So if you'd like to learn more, please reach out. My email is on the screen, or check out our GitHub page, download the handbook. It's github.com/18f/derisking.govtech. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alicia. Next up, we have Ben Judy, who's going to be discussing advanced form controls for the US web design system.
Thanks, Will. Hey everyone, I'm Ben Judy. I am pleased to tell you about our Phase 3 project, which is the USWDS Advanced Form Controls. So who wants to fill out a government form? The high-level problem that we're trying to solve is that filling out a typical form for a federal agency isn't always an awesome user experience. And these forms need to be digitized, they need to be usable, consistent in appearance, and they need to be accessible by the end of this calendar year. And the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act really provides some urgency there as well. So how are we going to make forms better? Next slide. Fortunately, we have the US web design system, and that provides design and code for web UI components, and also usability guidance and accessibility guidance. However, the form components that were in the design system at the start of this year were few in number and very basic. You had your input field, your drop down, your basic form button, but there were definitely some clear gaps to fill in to provide a more robust set of form controls. So the goal of this 10X Phase 3 project is to add more advanced form controls to the design system. This will enable agencies who use the US web design system for their websites to more rapidly create sophisticated, modern, usable, accessible web forms that have a consistent appearance, and ultimately make forms something that you want to interact with instead of frustratedly feeling like you have to figure out how to fill them out. And you can see the names of some of our team members there at the bottom of the page. Next slide. So we've already contributed a number of new components. These went live with version 2.7.0 of the US web design system, which is the most recent major release. We have a couple varieties of button groups. There's a default appearance. There's also segmented button groups. There's a character count feature for input fields and text areas, and also a combo box, which is kind of like a fancy drop down where the user can type into an input field to select from a large list of options. So these are components that are now available and being used by site developers. We're really glad that we've already delivered this value from this project. Next slide. And there are more components coming right around the corner. We're in the final stages of preparing a calendar date picker and a date range picker, a drag and drop file uploader, and a tooltip. So these and more components will be coming to a US web design system release in the near future. Next slide. So we've learned a lot so far. I think one thing that we just continue to see reinforced is the importance of getting fast feedback and building close collaboration with our community of users and different ways of doing that communication. And those users include, of course, end users of government websites, but also the users of the US web design system, who are the people who build and maintain government websites. And we've had success with a variety of different approaches. Early on, we formed a sort of advisory group, although that probably makes it sound more formal than it really is. It's really just a small group of volunteers who review our component designs and give us feedback on how to improve them. And we use Slack quite a bit to show our work in progress and ask the USWDS user community for their input. And we've done some more formal usability testing to get feedback in a more structured manner. So all of these different approaches have been invaluable to ensure that we achieve our goals with these components. Next slide. So again, here's the team. You can find us pretty easily on the TTS Slack workspace for those that are on there in various channels. The USWDS public channel is one place you can post thoughts or questions about form components. We'll see you there. And thank you for allowing me to share the progress we're making with advanced form controls.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Next up, I'll introduce Peter Rowland from 18F, who's going to be discussing 10x's Privacy Dashboard project.
Yeah, thanks, Will, and hello, everybody. I'm Peter Rowland, and I've been working with the Phase 3 10x team to build a privacy dashboard with GSA's Privacy Office. Next slide. So as a quick background to this project, all privacy offices in government are responsible for publishing and maintaining 2 documents related to privacy of their information systems. They're called privacy impact assessments and systems of record notices. These documents are sort of privacy policies for every information system the government has, and they have a lot of important information in them, but they're very legalistic and they're sort of difficult to read and understand. And then for our partners within GSA's Privacy Office, they spend a lot of time preparing and keeping these documents up to date, and the processes they use to do that are pretty manual and time consuming. Next slide, please. So in our Phase 3, what we decided to build was a searchable inventory of PII contained in each information system maintained by GSA. PII is personally identifiable information. The way we did this is we built some scraping software to mine the relevant sections of the documents I mentioned earlier that contained information, usually a list, but sometimes a narrative about the PII that those systems handled and the purpose that they were collecting and maintaining that information for. And then we also designed and built a front end that has a live search functionality that displays this information in sort of a very consistent and clear manner. And GSA Privacy now has administrative access and ownership over the back end of this tool, so they're able to make updates that are then reflected in real time. Next slide, please. So I hope you can see this okay, but this is a screenshot of what it looks like. But basically every card in the sort of main section has the name of each system, the type of document that we pulled the information from, some other information about documents it references and authority, and then a list of the PII elements that are handled by that system, and a link to the source document. And this search bar at the top, as you type into it, will down select and filter all the cards displayed on the page in real time, as well as the total number of items being displayed. And we also have search by category of document as well. Next slide, please. So what we learned really was, I guess PII was a really good place to start because it was sort of at the intersection of what the privacy office and a lot of privacy offices actually need to manage and maintain, but also what the public is interested in, which is sort of ultimately what this is all being done for and why these documents are produced. We also learned that by sort of creating this way to visualize the information and work with it, we're providing some encouragement in the community of privacy offices to change the way they actually collect the data. Right now it's done pretty narratively in that a contractor or the owner of the system, person responsible for it, will sort of write out in a paragraph all the PII that they collect. But because of this tool and things like it, a lot of them are considering going over to using forms that would make it easier to work with as data rather than as text. Next slide, please. And that's sort of it. We've actually been on hold with this project because we, at the start of the coronavirus and the shutdown, we decided that we wanted to suspend our efforts, but we're about to return probably in July. But you can get a hold of us on Slack in our channel. Our tool is on GitHub at this URL, 18f/privacy dashboard, and we have a link to a live demo included here too. We also have a group email address if you want to email us and talk more about this stuff. So thanks, and please check it out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. Next up, I'm going to shine the spotlight on Mr. Gray Brooks, who will talk about his project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming together today. A few quick overlying points of this, and then hopefully, what we talk about in the next few minutes is kind of the part of the iceberg that you can see above the water. And if you're interested, I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on the part of the iceberg below the water. Next slide. So this spotlight is the code name we use for the site scanning program, where there are a number of programs across our office, 18F and TTS, that have client bases at all federal agencies, whether it's data.gov or search.gov or code.gov, USA.gov. We have many internal needs to engage with the federal web presence, and trying to quantify that and derive actionable information that you can use about what the federal web presence is and how, where we can help is a really big problem. Specifically, there are, I believe, almost exactly 1,250 second level domains. So FBI.gov, USDA.gov, whitehouse.gov. But then when you actually start scanning to figure out all of these subdomains, there are approximately 25,000 subdomains. So whether it's blog.gsa.gov or 18f.gsa.gov, you're really looking at that as the federal web presence across all three branches. And the problem we've been trying to tackle more is, what are some elegant, efficient ways to start having real-time automated metrics for all of them? One of my favorite analogies for successful government open data is weather data, and that's a bit cliched, but the reason I hearken to it is that that is one aspect of data that we have all just become utterly spoiled and used to having. I think none of us doubt the ability to find out what the temperature is outside tonight or what the forecast is for later today. And so I really want us to get to a place where we have that expectation of what we can have at hand available automatically when it comes to our federal websites. Next slide. So specifically, the major components of this program is building open sourced, discrete individual scans that run once a day, that run against those 25,000 public federal websites, that do some simple analysis and then output the results as flat data, specifically JSON and CSV. And then also that goes into an API, which is there for third-party mashups and reuse. And by that, I really, am passionate about the model being one where we aren't trying to build a destination website where you come to us for all of the interfaces, but rather that we generate the data and make some useful lightweight interfaces, but make those interfaces such that you can clone them and instantiate them very easily and inexpensively, or even for free, to personalize them for your agency. The best way we've kind of seen to keep ourselves grounded is by having stakeholders within GSA that we're building, scans for, that they have a use case for. Specifically, the ones we've built so far are detecting and analyzing US web design system, detecting and analyzing digital analytics program, detecting and analyzing code.json and data.json inventory files, finding data hubs and developer hubs, analyzing search engine optimization and HTTPS configuration, and a few other things. Next slide. The lessons we've learned from some past efforts on this front is to keep every scan very lightweight and modular, as opposed to building an ever more monolithic code base. To focus on the data quality that's coming out and actually looking at it and analyzing it and making sure it's clean data and useful. And then again, making presentation layers in Federalist or GitHub pages that can easily be instantiated, one time or 100 times. Next slide. So there's a lot more. Apparently, the saying was actually that there's God is in the details, and there's a lot more God in the details. I guess the devil too. And so if you go to that GitHub repo, you'll find a lot more of it there. If you're interested in any of this, please email us and get in touch. Because the model is open source and in the open, our goal is no matter what we're scanning, to be scanning against the whole federal web presence, and then to keep growing out what that is and what all we are trying to analyze and do intelligence for. And if you have ideas, we would love to hear them.
Great, thank you so much, Gray. And last but certainly not least, I'm pleased to introduce Mike Gintz, who will be talking about 10x's Eligibility APIs initiative.
Cool, thanks, Will. So hi, everyone. My name is Mike Gintz. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a change strategist at 18F. I'll be presenting about the Eligibility APIs initiative today on behalf of my teammates, Alex Sobel, who's the software engineer on the team, and Carrie Fair, who's our account manager. So what problem are we trying to solve? The Eligibility APIs initiative is trying to help federal and state benefits programs use technology methods to streamline implementation of eligibility policy. So eligibility requirements for benefits programs can be incredibly complex. Logically, they can involve multiple digital systems communicating with each other, which we all know is super easy. They can involve lots of different people, communication across federal, state, local boundaries, et cetera. Lots of messy human-centric challenges, many messy technical challenges. We've been exploring how we could build eligibility rules as flexible APIs so that they can function as engines that potentially power whole suites of loosely connected applications that depend upon eligibility determinations. They can connect different benefits programs to each other and streamline the process for applicants and staffers, and hopefully help to clarify some of the incredibly messy wires in this engagement. So this is easier said than done, obviously, especially against the backdrop of a global pandemic and really crushing demand upon benefits programs at both the federal and states levels. We've worked with a handful of federal partners in this past, but I'll mention just a couple engagements we're involved in right now. So the first one is we're working with Virginia Poverty Law Center to test and deploy a SNAP calculator powered by an eligibility API on their website. So Virginia Poverty Law Center is a legal aid organization in Virginia, not just a clever name. They work directly with folks who are applying for SNAP and other benefits. So they're very present with users in the field. And we're partnering with them to demonstrate the utility of an API in building user-friendly responsive software. So our calculator uses an eligibility rules API that has federal and Virginia-specific SNAP eligibility logic to tell applicants whether they are likely to be eligible for SNAP benefits, how much they might expect to receive, and also why in plain English, or at least as plain English as you can get when you're describing the incredibly complex logic behind SNAP eligibility. We're actually going to usability test this calculator tomorrow, which is very exciting. And realistically, I probably could have added a screenshot of it into this presentation, but oops. So maybe next time. Point two here is we also have another partnership simmering with the Department of Labor on a particular benefit in the unemployment insurance space. It's called short-time compensation. And put simply, it allows employers in an economic downturn to collect prorated, to cut their staff's hours rather than lay them off, and for the employees to collect prorated unemployment benefits based on how many hours get cut. So it preserves people's employment, but it still allows them to maintain their benefits and hopefully collect something of a more sustainable amount of money, even while the economy is not doing well. We're in the early stages of this partnership. I mentioned it just to draw attention to the fact that the API's idea here is applicable across a very wide variety of benefits. STC is not really much like SNAP at all, but the concept is still applicable. So what have we learned? We've learned so much that's specific to our project, but in the spirit of 10X and broad government impact, I wanted to mention a couple of quick things that I think are widely applicable to anybody working in this sort of innovation space. The first one is the closer you can get to where implementation happens, the better. States, NGOs, local community organizations understand what users are experiencing and what they need. We're part of the federal government, but there are a lot of partnerships happening between the federal government and these other entities, and figuring out how to make the best use of that, will help you figure out where to engage and what leverage points are more useful. So, if you're not talking to real users or talking to people who work with real users regularly, you may be swimming in a theoretical space. You may not be learning what you really need to learn in order to make something that will actually help real people. The second point here is a little bit about the challenges of combining a sort of hashtag disruption style projects with other ongoing program work. So there's often a timescale collision. 10X projects really want to move fast. And oftentimes people on these project teams learn things that we want to react to faster than outside forces, like partners or budgets are capable of moving. So this will confront anybody who is trying to, as I said, hashtag disrupt government behaviors or habits. You'll constantly be learning in work like this. And you're going to feel a strong push to integrate that learning into your work, but you're going to face real obstacles by being in an environment full of a process that often can't react very quickly. So from the very beginning of the work, I would say, make a point of figuring out how to cycle those learnings back into your project while still maintaining a reasonable expectation for how long things are actually likely to take before they manifest. So if you would like to learn more about this project, this is our contact information. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And I want to thank all of our presenters today. I hope our audience found them all valuable, intriguing, and learned a lot. And I know that all of our projects would love to hear from folks. So please reach out to them if you or your agency could leverage anything that any of our projects are working on. We're going to move into a Q&A phase. And while our partners from DigitalGov University are queuing that up, I just wanted to throw out sort of a couple parting thoughts here at the end. One thing that I hope every single person on this call takes away is that all federal employees can submit ideas to 10X. Every single project that was discussed today started off as a small pitch, just a couple sentences long, that was submitted to 10X. And every federal employee can participate and submit an idea to us for consideration. The next round of consideration, well, I should say, our inbox is open 24/7, 365 days a year. Folks can submit pitches on a rolling basis. But as I mentioned in my opening, we evaluate these ideas a couple times each year. And the next deadline to submit an idea for consideration is August 5th. And the way that you can submit an idea is go to our website, 10x.gsa.gov. It's incredibly easy to submit a pitch. The only requirement really is that it's an idea for how the government can use technology to serve the public. And you just need to write it in less than 1,000 characters. And one special announcement that is going to be a bit different from those of you who have been following along with 10X in the past. As always with this round, any idea will still be considered regardless of sort of which kind of area or theme that it deals with. However, we are an experimental program and we are going to experiment with this next round. And we have highlighted 3 sort of themes or areas of focus that 10X is really interested in exploring to expand our investment portfolio. So like I said, any idea will still be considered, but here are a couple themes that we are particularly interested in looking at. One is disaster management efforts. This is quite timely given the current public health crisis, but we are also looking for ideas on how the government can better respond or mitigate to disasters like a natural disaster, like a hurricane or something like that. And the next area that we are really targeting is direct public services. And what we mean here is an idea for a product or service where the end user is a member of the public. So a lot of 10x projects that we build are built by 10x and are ultimately going to be used by other agencies. But we are specifically interested in exploring projects that are going to directly involve face-to-face interaction with the public through technology. A good example is one of the projects we heard from earlier with the Improving Access to Government Housing Assistance project that XD and the Department of Housing and Urban Development are working on. And finally, the third area that we are interested in exploring further is also quite timely. We're interested in projects that are going to promote diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in government public services. A good example of that is the Combating Bias in AI and ML implementation project that Shaudi talked about earlier. So again, those are just a couple of areas that we're interested in, but please, if you have any idea, even if they're outside of those 3 buckets, please submit them to us before August 5th.